The rain in New York did not wash away sins. Tonight it felt like it was trying to drown Evelyn Hayes alive. Her breath tore through her throat like shattered glass as she ran, her worn heels slipping on the wet pavement. Blood trickled down her scraped knee, mingling with the dirty rain. But she could not stop. She dared not stop. Behind her, the heavy rhythmic thuds of boots splashing against the asphalt grew louder. 3 men. Men sent by Derek Walsh, the man who had been her boss, her mentor, and the man she thought she could trust. Just 2 hours ago, Evelyn had been a diligent financial analyst working late to find the missing funds in her department. She found them all right. She found the offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the massive corporate theft Derek had orchestrated. And she found out he had put it all under her name. When she confronted him, there was no guilt in his eyes. Only a cold, calculating void. He had locked the office door and made a phone call. That was when Evelyn knew she was not supposed to leave that building alive. She scrambled down a narrow, neon-lit alley, her wet coat clinging heavily to her trembling shoulders. Her stomach twisted into violent knots, her fingers numb with a terror so deep it paralyzed her mind. She had nothing. No money, no phone, no power. She was just Evelyn, a 32-year-old woman who had worked her entire life to be invisible and safe, now hunted like an animal in the shadows. Ahead of her, breaking through the darkness of the alley, was a blinding wall of light. The Thorne Industries Tower. The glass and steel monolith stood like a fortress, its ground floor lobby ablaze with golden chandeliers and the soft hum of classical music. It was the annual Thorne Charity Gala, a place for billionaires, politicians, and the untouchable elite, a place where women like Evelyn were not allowed to breathe the same air. She looked over her shoulder. The shadows of Derek's men were stretching across the brick walls. They were smiling. They thought they had her cornered. Evelyn did not think. Pure, visceral survival pushed her forward. She threw her entire weight against the heavy glass doors of the Thorne Tower and burst into the lobby. The music did not stop, but the conversation died instantly. 100 pairs of eyes shifted toward the entrance. Women in $10,000 silk gowns and men in immaculate tailored tuxedos stared in sheer disgust and confusion. Evelyn stood shivering on the imported Italian marble-dripping rainwater mud and blood onto the pristine floor. Her hair was plastered to her pale face, her mascara smudged like bruised shadows under her wide, terrified eyes. She looked like a ghost that had wandered into a palace. Security guards immediately moved in their hands, reaching for their radios, their faces tight with annoyance. "Ma'am, you need to leave right now," one of them barked, grabbing her arm with enough force to make her wince. "Please," Evelyn gasped, her voice cracking, her chest heaving. "Please, they're going to kill me. Call the police. Just call the police." Before the guard could drag her out, the glass doors swung open again. Derek Walsh stepped into the light, flanked by his men. He was wearing a sharp gray suit, looking every bit the respectable corporate executive. He quickly masked his anger with a look of deep, patronizing concern. "I am so sorry for the intrusion," Derek said loudly, his voice smooth and professional, addressing the security and the staring crowd. "She is one of my employees. She has been going through a severe mental breakdown, stealing from the company, hallucinating. We have been trying to get her to a hospital safely." The whispers started. The rich crowd murmured their disgust, turning into pitying judgment. Evelyn's heart plummeted. The world tilted violently. She looked at the faces around her, and she saw no help. Only a wall of wealth that believed the man in the suit over the bleeding woman in the wet coat. "No," Evelyn whispered, trying to pull her arm away from the guard. "He is lying. He framed me. Please do not let him take me." Derek stepped closer, his eyes flashing with a vicious, silent promise of violence. "Come on, Evelyn," he said softly, his hand reaching out to grab her wrist. "Let's go quietly before you embarrass yourself any further. You are making a mess." His fingers clamped around her wrist like a vice digging into the bone. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. a tear slipping down her cold cheek. Her dignity, her life, everything was ending right here on this cold marble floor. She was completely, utterly alone. "Take your hand off her." The voice was not loud. It did not have to be. It cut through the vast lobby like a blade of pure ice, dropping the temperature in the room to freezing. The silence that followed was absolute. From the grand staircase descending with slow, deliberate steps was Victor Thorne. Evelyn opened her eyes. She had seen him in magazines on the covers of Financial Times, but the camera captured none of the sheer, suffocating gravity the man possessed. He was 38 tall, with shoulders that filled out his bespoke black tuxedo-like armor. His jaw was a hard, unforgiving line, and his eyes were a shade of dark gray that swallowed the light. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Derek. His gaze was locked entirely on Evelyn. The security guards immediately dropped their hands and stepped back, lowering their heads in deep deference. Derek froze, his arrogant posture faltering under the sudden, crushing weight of the billionaire's presence. "Mr. Thorne," Derek stammered, attempting a confident smile. "I apologize for the disruption. This woman is unwell. We are taking her out of your way." Victor reached the bottom of the stairs. He did not even blink at Derek. He moved past the corrupt executive as if he were nothing but dust, stopping right in front of Evelyn. He was so close she could smell his cologne, something rich, dark like cedar and cold rain. Evelyn trembled violently, her breathing shallow. She looked up at him, expecting him to order her thrown into the street. Instead, Victor slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket. He slipped it off his shoulders and wrapped it around her shivering frame. The jacket was heavy, warm, and completely engulfed her. "Mr. Thorne." Derek tried again, his voice pitching higher with nervous panic. "She is a corporate thief. She is unstable." Victor finally turned his head. He looked at Derek Walsh, and the absolute lack of emotion in the billionaire's eyes made the air leave the room. "I said." Victor spoke softly, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the lobby. "Take your hand off her. If you touch her again, I will have my men sever it from your wrist right here on my floor." Derek snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. The blood drained from his face. The entire crowd of elite guests stopped breathing. The CEO of Thorne Industries, a man known for his ruthless emotional restraint, a man who crushed empires before breakfast, was publicly threatening violence over a drenched, bleeding woman nobody knew. Victor turned his attention back to Evelyn. His expression softened by a fraction of an inch a shift, so small only she could see it. He raised his hand and gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her pale cheek. The touch sent a violent jolt through her cold body. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he asked, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. Evelyn shook her head, unable to find her voice. Her throat was tight, her stomach fluttering in a chaotic mix of terror and sudden, overwhelming safety. Victor nodded. He looked over her shoulder at his head of security. "Lock down the building. No one leaves. Call the police and have them arrest Mr. Walsh and his men for attempted murder and corporate fraud." Derek stepped back, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "What? You have no proof. You cannot do this. You do not even know who she is." Victor wrapped his arm firmly around Evelyn's waist, pulling her flush against his side. He supported her entire weight, shielding her from the world with his own body. He looked back at Derek, a dark, chilling smirk playing on his lips. "You are a very stupid man, Derek," Victor said smoothly. "You chased her into my building. You laid hands on her in my presence. And you assumed I did not know who she was." He turned away from the panicked executive leading Evelyn toward the private elevators. Over his shoulder, he delivered the final crushing blow. "She is mine. And tonight you just signed your own death warrant." The private elevator doors slid shut, sealing away the chaotic whispers of the lobby and the muffled, desperate shouting of Derek Walsh. The sudden quiet was deafening. The only sound left in the mirrored glass box was the soft, rapid hitching of Evelyn's breath. She stood frozen, staring at the polished steel doors. Her body was trembling so violently she felt like her bones were rattling. The adrenaline that had kept her running was rapidly bleeding out. leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying awareness of her reality. She was soaked bleeding and standing next to one of the most powerful, ruthless men in New York City. Victor Thorne had stepped back, giving her space, but his presence filled the confined elevator. He was a force of nature trapped in a bespoke suit. Evelyn slowly turned her head, clutching the lapels of his heavy, warm jacket tight across her chest. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered, her voice rough and brittle. I do not understand. Why did you do that?" Victor did not look at her immediately. He watched the floor numbers climbing upward on the digital display. 80, 85, 90. When he finally shifted his gaze to her, the sheer intensity of his dark gray eyes made her breath catch. "You were bleeding on my floor, Miss Hayes," he said smoothly, his tone unreadable. "I dislike messes." Evelyn blinked, stunned by his clinical response. "Miss Hayes." He knew her name. How did he know her name? Before she could ask, the elevator chimed and the doors glided open. "Welcome to the top, Evelyn," Victor murmured, placing a large, warm hand on the small of her back to guide her forward. The touch sent a cascade of heat down her spine, a stark contrast to the freezing rainwater soaking her clothes. She stepped out of the elevator and into another world. Victor's penthouse was a sprawling masterpiece of dark slate, floor-to-ceiling glass, and minimalist luxury. The storm raged outside the massive windows, lightning illuminating the sprawling Manhattan skyline. But inside, it was a fortress. It was silent, impeccably clean, and utterly untouchable. It felt less like a home and more like a velvet cage. Evelyn hesitated on the edge of the plush charcoal rug, intensely aware of the muddy water dripping from her ruined heels. "I am ruining your floor," she murmured, looking down at her bruised feet. "It is just a floor," Victor replied, his voice softening slightly as he walked past her, shrugging off his cufflinks. "Leave the shoes. Come here." She kicked off the ruined heels and followed him with hesitant steps. He guided her to a sprawling leather sofa, pressing gently on her shoulder until she sat. The leather was soft, absorbing her shivering frame. Victor walked over to a wet bar, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers. He was warm. She was freezing. "Drink," he commanded softly. She drank, her hands shaking so badly the crystal glass clinked against her teeth. Victor watched her, his expression an impenetrable mask. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek silver phone, pressing a single button. "Send Dr. Aris up. Now," he ordered into the device, then hung up. A doctor. No, please, you do not have to." Evelyn started, panic rising again in her chest. "You are bleeding, your wrist is bruised, and you are in shock." Victor interrupted his tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. "You will be examined. After that, my housekeeper Maria will show you to a guest suite where you can bathe. You are safe here, Evelyn. No one can touch you without my permission." Without his permission? The words hung heavily in the air. Evelyn looked at him, truly looked at him. The sharp angles of his face, the dark intensity in his eyes, the absolute authority in his posture. He had saved her, yes. But men like Victor Thorne did not do charity. They dealt in acquisitions. Had she just traded a pack of wolves for a solitary apex predator? "You told them I was yours," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, testing the boundaries of this strange new reality. Victor leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees, bringing his face dangerously close to hers. The scent of cedar and rain wrapped around her senses. It was the fastest way to make Derek Walsh understand that he was a dead man if he took another step. In my world, possession is the only language beasts understand. He was so close she could see the faint pulse beating at the base of his throat. "But you do not own me," she said, lifting her chin, clinging to the last shred of her dignity. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of Victor's mouth. Not yet. Before Evelyn could process the terrifying weight of those two words, the private elevator chimed. A middle-aged woman in a neat uniform stepped out, followed quickly by a man carrying a medical bag. The next hour passed in a surreal blur. Dr. Orris was quick and efficient, cleaning the scrape on her knee and carefully wrapping her bruised wrist with a cold compress. He confirmed she was physically fine, just suffering from severe exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Once he left Maria, the housekeeper led Evelyn down a long, quiet hallway to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. "Mr. Thorne instructed me to draw a hot bath for you, Miss Hayes," Maria said kindly, opening the door to a massive marble bathroom. "There are fresh clothes in the closet. Please take your time." When the door clicked shut, leaving her completely alone, Evelyn finally broke. She locked the door, a pathetic reflex, considering where she was, and sank to the heated marble floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees and sobbed. She cried for her lost career, for the betrayal of a mentor she had trusted, for the sheer visceral terror of running for her life in the dark. After the tears ran dry, leaving her hollow and exhausted, she stripped off her ruined clothes and stepped into the steaming water of the grand bathtub. The heat soaked into her aching muscles, washing away the dirt and blood, but it could not wash away the deep-seated anxiety settling in her chest. She dried off and put on a pair of silk pajamas she found in the closet. They were ridiculously expensive, soft against her bruised skin, and smelled faintly of fresh linen. She stepped out of the bedroom and made her way back to the living room. The lights had been dimmed. The storm outside had calmed to a steady, rhythmic rainfall. Victor was standing by the massive window, holding a glass of amber liquid, looking out over the glittering city. He had removed his tie, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, making him look less like a CEO and more like a dangerous man resting in his lair. He did not turn around when she entered, but he spoke, his voice deep and resonant in the quiet room. "Are you hungry?" "No," Evelyn replied quietly, stepping closer but keeping a safe distance. "I am just tired." Victor finally turned to face her. His eyes swept over her, taking in the oversized silk pajamas, her damp hair, her pale face. Something dark and possessive flared in his gaze, but he quickly reined it in. "Sit down, Evelyn," he said, gesturing to the armchair. She sat, pulling her knees close together. "What happens now? Mr. Thorne-Derrick will not stop. He will go to the police. He will frame me with the forged documents. He has the entire board of directors in his pocket." Victor took a slow sip of his whiskey. He walked over and sat on the coffee table directly in front of her, closing the distance between them. "Derek Walsh is a problem," Victor agreed softly, "but he is no longer your problem. He is mine." "Why?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me." Victor stared at her, his jaw tightening. He reached out his large, warm hand, gently gripping her uninjured wrist. His thumb stroked the delicate skin over her erratic pulse. The touch was profoundly intimate, sending a shiver through her entire body. "That is where you are wrong, Evelyn," Victor murmured, his voice dropping to a rough, hypnotic whisper. "I know exactly who you are. I know you drink black coffee at 7:00 a.m. I know you work until the building is empty because you are trying to pay off your late mother's medical debts. And I know you have been enduring Derek's subtle cruelties for 2 years without breaking." Evelyn's breath hitched. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. She stared at him, her mind spinning in terrified confusion. How do you know all of that?" she whispered, her fingers trembling against his hold. Victor did not answer immediately. He just looked at her, his eyes stripping away every defense she had ever built. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," he said quietly, releasing her wrist and standing up. "Tomorrow you will find out just how long I have been waiting for you to walk through my doors." Morning broke over Manhattan in shards of brilliant, unforgiving light. Evelyn woke up to the soft rustle of expensive silk sheets and the dull, lingering ache in her legs. For 3 agonizing seconds, her mind was blank. Then the memories of the previous night crashed down on her like a collapsing building. The rain, the chase, Derek's cruel eyes, the sheer suffocating presence of Victor Thorne wrapping his jacket around her freezing shoulders. She sat up abruptly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The guest suite was empty, bathed in sunlight that poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Her ruined clothes from yesterday were gone, replaced by a neat stack of fresh garments resting on a velvet armchair, a cashmere sweater, and tailored trousers. They were in her exact size. Evelyn swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Her feet touched the heated hardwood floor, but her fingers were ice cold. Victor's final words from last night echoed in her mind, heavy and terrifying. Asterisk. Tomorrow you will find out just how long I have been waiting for you to walk through my doors. She dressed quickly, her hands trembling as she pulled the soft cashmere over her head. The material was impossibly soft, a stark contrast to the sharp, jagged edges of her anxiety. She stepped out of the bedroom into the sprawling, silent penthouse. The living room was empty. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel, and black marble was immaculate and deserted. "Mr. Thorne!" She called out, her voice sounding entirely too small in the cavernous space. No answer. She walked down the wide hallway drawn by a door that was left slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she stepped into Victor's home office. It was a room designed for a king. Walls lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, a massive modern fireplace, and a heavy obsidian glass desk facing the breathtaking city skyline. Evelyn knew she should not be in here. It was a dangerous invasion of privacy, especially regarding a man capable of ending lives with a single phone call. But her eyes caught something resting precisely in the center of the immaculate glass desk. A thick manila folder, and printed boldly across the top tab was her name. Asterisk Evelyn Hayes. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her stomach plummeted. She took a slow, agonizing step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the Persian rug. She reached out her fingers, shaking so badly she could barely grip the edge of the cardboard. She flipped the folder open. What she saw made the blood drain entirely from her face. Inside was not just a background check. It was a meticulous, deeply unsettling chronicle of her existence over the past 6 months. There were photographs. Evelyn sitting at her desk late at night, illuminated only by the glow of her monitor. Evelyn walking out of the corporate building in the rain, a cheap umbrella shielding her from the downpour. Evelyn visiting her mother's grave. Beneath the photographs were financial records, her bank statements, her meager savings, the staggering pile of medical debts she had inherited. But there was more. The second half of the file contained Derek Walsh's offshore accounts, transcripts of Derek's encrypted emails, a complete, undeniable paper trail proving Derek had been siphoning millions from the company and setting Evelyn up as the perfect, oblivious scapegoat. He knew. Victor Thorne knew Derek was framing her. He had the proof right here. You did not sleep well. Evelyn spun around, dropping the folder onto the desk. The photographs scattered across the black glass. Victor was standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked relaxed, powerful, and utterly unapologetic. "You knew," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking as a wave of betrayal and horror washed over her. She pointed a trembling finger at the scattered papers. "You knew Derek was destroying my life. You had the evidence. Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you warn me?" Victor stepped into the office, his movements slow and deliberate. He set the coffee cups down on a side table and walked toward her. Evelyn instinctively took a step back, hitting the edge of the heavy desk. "I was planning an aggressive, hostile takeover of your firm," Victor said smoothly, his dark gray eyes locking onto hers. "Derek Walsh was a loose end. I had my team investigate him. In doing so, we found his scapegoat. You. So you just watched me." Evelyn's voice rose, a desperate, angry edge cutting through her fear. "You watched him manipulate me. You watched me work myself to the bone while he tied a noose around my neck." Victor stopped just inches from her. His large frame completely blocked her escape, trapping her between his body and the desk. "I watched you endure, Evelyn. I watched you take on an impossible burden with absolute dignity. I watched a woman who had nothing fighting tooth and nail to survive in a world built to crush her." He raised a hand, and despite her anger, Evelyn froze as his knuckles brushed lightly against her pale cheek. The contrast between his cold, ruthless logic and the gentle heat of his touch was dizzying. "I was not going to let him send you to prison," Victor continued, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic rumble. "The takeover was scheduled for next week. I was going to present this file to the board, ruin Derek, and offer you his position. But Derek grew impatient. He moved the timeline up to last night. That was a miscalculation on my part, one that I will never repeat." Evelyn stared up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You think you can play God with my life? You think you can just watch me suffer until you decide it is the right time to play the hero?" "I am not a hero, Evelyn," Victor said softly, his gaze dropping to her trembling lips before meeting her eyes again. "I am a businessman. But yesterday, when you crashed through my doors, bleeding and terrified the business transaction ended, you became something else." "What?" she breathed, her heart hammering frantically against her ribs. "Mine," he stated simply, an absolute truth that left no room for negotiation. Before she could process the weight of his declaration, a sharp chime echoed from the wall-mounted flat-screen television across the room. Victor reached into his pocket, pulled out a remote, and unmuted the screen. It was a live broadcast from a major financial news network. And sitting at the interview desk, looking somber and deeply troubled, was Derek Walsh. "It is a tragedy, really," Derek was saying to the anchor, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Evelyn Hayes was a brilliant analyst. We trusted her, but the pressure must have gotten to her. She transferred over $4 million to private offshore accounts. When I confronted her last night, she had a violent psychotic break and fled into the city. We are working with the authorities to bring her in safely." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. A cold sweat broke out across her skin. Her hands gripped the edge of Victor's desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her reputation, her career, her entire life was being incinerated on national television. "He is destroying me," she whispered, a tear finally slipping free and sliding down her cheek. "Everyone is going to believe him. I am a criminal now." She expected Victor to offer empty comfort. She expected him to tell her it would be okay. Instead, Victor Thorne let out a low, dark chuckle. The sound was chilling, devoid of humor, and filled with a terrifying promise of violence. "Let him talk," Victor said, his eyes fixed on the screen, watching Derek with the cold calculation of a predator observing its prey walking into a trap. He turned his attention back to Evelyn. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Let him build his little narrative," Victor whispered, leaning in until his lips were inches from her ear. "Let him convince the world he has won. Because the higher he climbs on this lie, Evelyn, the harder he is going to fall when I shatter his knees." Evelyn looked at the screen, then up at the ruthless billionaire standing before her. She was standing in the eye of a hurricane. The world outside wanted to tear her apart, but inside this velvet cage, protected by the most dangerous man in New York, she had never been safer. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice steadying for the first time since last night. Victor's lips curved into a slow, devastating smile. "We are going to let him dig his own grave, and then, my dear, you are going to push him in." The television screen went black. Victor had pressed the button on the remote, plunging the vast, sunlit office back into a heavy silence. Evelyn stood frozen by the edge of the obsidian glass desk, her chest incredibly tight. Derek's lies were still echoing in her ears. He was painting her as a hysterical criminal mastermind, a desperate woman who had cracked under corporate pressure and stolen millions. "He is so convincing," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with a sickening mix of awe and disgust. "If I did not know the truth, I would look at that screen and believe him. That is the talent of a functional psychopath," Victor replied, tossing the remote onto the leather sofa. He walked back to his desk, organizing the scattered photographs and financial documents with calm, methodical precision. "But a lie requires constant maintenance, Evelyn. The truth only requires a stage, and I own the biggest stage in this city." He pressed a sleek intercom button on his desk. "Send Patricia up, and have the styling team ready in the guest wing in exactly 1 hour." Evelyn frowned, wrapping her arms around her cashmere sweater. "Styling team Victor, I am a wanted woman. Derek just told the entire country that the police are looking for me. I cannot just play dress-up right now." Victor stopped and looked at her. His dark eyes were intense, unyielding, and utterly fearless. "The police are not looking for you, Evelyn. My legal team contacted the district attorney the moment you fell asleep last night. We informed them that you are a protected whistleblower under the direct custody of Thorne Industries. They have been instructed to stand down, while my people compile the irrefutable evidence of Derek's embezzlement." Evelyn's breath hitched. In less than 12 hours while she was sleeping in his bed, Victor had quietly and violently neutralized the legal threat against her. He had thrown the invisible, impenetrable shield of his billion-dollar empire over her shoulders, blocking out the rest of the world. As for the styling team, Victor continued stepping around the heavy desk to stand directly before her. "Tomorrow morning, Derek Walsh is presenting his quarterly report to your company's board of directors. He plans to formally blame you for the missing funds to clear his own name and secure his promotion. We are going to attend that meeting." He reached out, his large knuckles grazing her pale cheekbone. It was a touch so light, yet so incredibly grounding it made her shiver. "You are not walking into that boardroom as a victim, Evelyn. You are walking in as his executioner. And an executioner needs her armor." An hour later, the quiet, isolated solitude of the Penthouse was transformed into a high-functioning corporate command center. Patricia, a sharp-eyed, ruthless lawyer in her late 50s, sat with Evelyn at the massive dining table. They went over every single line of Derek's offshore transfers. Evelyn's initial fear slowly morphed into a cold, highly focused anger. This was her domain. She knew these numbers better than anyone in the city. "Look right here," Evelyn said, pointing a steady finger at a printed spreadsheet, her voice gaining confidence. "Derek routed the stolen funds through 3 shell companies in the Caymans to wash the trail, but he made a critical mistake. He used the exact same IP address to authorize the offshore transfers that he uses to pay his private country club dues. He got lazy and arrogant." Patricia raised an elegant eyebrow, a smile of pure, predatory respect forming on her red lips. She looked across the room to where Victor was standing, leaning against the black marble counter, silently sipping his dark coffee. "She is brilliant, Victor. This IP log is the final nail in the coffin. We can tie the stolen funds directly to Derek Walsh's personal laptop. It is bulletproof." Victor did not look at Patricia. His eyes were entirely fixed on Evelyn. There was a dark, profound pride in his gaze that made Evelyn's stomach flutter wildly. "I told you she was," Victor murmured, his voice rich and low, sending a wave of heat straight to her core. When the legal strategy was secured and Patricia departed, Evelyn was ushered into the massive master dressing room by the styling team Victor had summoned. Evelyn was used to buying clearance suits and practical, sensible shoes. Now she was surrounded by racks of designer couture fine silks and imported wools that cost more than her annual salary. Mr. Thorne requested power, elegance, and absolutely no compromises, the lead stylist said gently, holding up a pristine, perfectly tailored white suit. White stands out in a boardroom full of gray, frightened men. It says you are untouchable. It says you have absolutely nothing to hide. Evelyn put on the suit. The tailoring was flawless, hugging her curves with sharp, authoritative lines that demanded immediate respect. When she stepped into a pair of sleek, black designer stilettos, and looked at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was styled in an elegant, sleek blowout. Her makeup was sharp, clean, and minimal, completely hiding the exhaustion of the previous night and amplifying the fierce, intelligent determination in her brown eyes. She did not look like the terrified woman shivering in the cold rain. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield to reclaim her throne. Victor stood in the doorway of the dressing room. He was already wearing his suit for the evening, a stark charcoal three-piece that made him look impossibly broad and deeply intimidating. But as his eyes swept over Evelyn, taking in her transformation, his imposing posture softened just a fraction. He walked toward her, his footsteps completely silent on the thick carpet. The stylists quickly and quietly exited the room without a single word, recognizing the shift in the air, leaving them entirely alone. Victor stopped right behind her, their reflections standing side by side in the massive mirror. He was dark and consuming. She was bright and unyielding. The luxury power contrast was breathtaking. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a long black velvet box. "You forgot one thing," he said softly. He opened the box. Resting on the dark velvet was a stunning, delicate diamond necklace. It was not loud or gaudy. It was a masterpiece of subtle, staggering wealth. Before Evelyn could protest the extravagance, Victor stepped closer. His broad chest brushed against her back. He lifted the necklace and fastened the platinum clasp around her throat. His warm, slightly rough fingers lingered on the sensitive nape of her neck, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight down her spine. "Victor, this is far too much," Evelyn whispered, staring at the flawless diamonds glittering at her collarbone. "I cannot accept this. It belongs in a vault." "It is not a gift, Evelyn," Victor murmured, leaning down until his lips were brushing against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "It is a collar. It tells every single man in that boardroom tomorrow that you belong to me, that if they even think about disrespecting you, if they even look at you with doubt, they will have to answer directly to Thorne Industries." His possessiveness was absolute and unapologetic. It should have terrified her, a woman who had spent her entire life fighting to remain independent and unseen. But after being betrayed, hunted, and thrown to the wolves by a man she trusted, Victor's fierce, unwavering claim felt like the ultimate sanctuary. It felt like coming home. She leaned back slightly, resting her head against his solid chest, holding his dark gaze in the mirror. "Derek is going to be completely furious when he sees us," she said softly, a spark of real anticipation in her voice. Victor's hand slid from her neck down to her shoulders, his grip firm, warm, and anchoring. Derek Walsh is going to experience a level of public humiliation he did not know existed. Tonight, he thinks he is the hunter. He thinks he has destroyed you and won the game. But he does not realize he has chased you straight into the arms of the one man who can tear his entire world apart. Victor gently turned her around to face him. He looked down into her eyes, the ruthless billionaire stripping away all pretense, looking at the brilliant woman he had chosen to protect. "Are you ready to take your life back, Evelyn?" Evelyn took a very deep breath. The paralyzing fear that had gripped her in the alleyway was completely gone, burned away, and replaced by a cold, righteous fire. She nodded slowly, her expression hardening into a beautiful mask of pure determination. "I am ready," she said. Victor smiled, a dark, devastating curve of his lips that promised absolute ruin for their enemies. "Good. Let us go destroy a man." The grand boardroom of Vanguard Financial was a monument to corporate power. Positioned on the 60th floor, enclosed entirely by glass walls, overlooking the gray morning sky of Manhattan, the room was usually a place of quiet, calculated decisions. Today it was the stage for Derek Walsh's final act of deception. Derek stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke navy suit. Surrounding him were the 12 members of the board of directors, the oldest and wealthiest men and women in the firm. On the projection screen behind him glowed a fabricated financial chart, painting a devastating picture of loss. "It truly breaks my heart to stand before you today and present these findings," Derek said, his voice dropping into a perfectly rehearsed tone of sorrow and heavy responsibility. Evelyn Hayes was a bright analyst. I mentored her myself. But the greed of the modern world can corrupt anyone. As you can see from the internal audit, Miss Hayes used her clearance to siphon nearly $4 million into untraceable offshore accounts. When I uncovered her theft last night, she suffered a violent breakdown and fled into the storm. The police are currently searching for her. The board members murmured amongst themselves, shaking their heads in collective disappointment. The chairman, an elderly man named Arthur Sterling, sighed heavily. "This is a public relations nightmare, Derek, but your swift action to uncover her crimes has saved Vanguard from complete ruin. The board is in agreement. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Chief Financial Officer." Derek lowered his head in a show of humble gratitude, though a sharp, triumphant smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. He had won. The money was his, the promotion was his, and the annoying, invisible little waitress of the corporate world was about to be locked in a prison cell. Then the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. It was not a polite knock. It was a violent breach that slammed the heavy doors against the walls with a crack like a gunshot. The murmurs in the room died instantly. 12 heads snapped toward the entrance. Evelyn Hayes stepped over the threshold. The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room was entirely audible. Evelyn did not look like a desperate, hunted fugitive. She looked like an absolute vision of power. The pristine, white-tailored suit clung to her frame, contrasting fiercely with the dark, heavy atmosphere of the room. Her posture was flawless, her head held high, and resting against her collarbone was a diamond necklace that caught the cold morning light, refracting it like shattered ice. Derek froze, his hands gripping the edges of the mahogany podium, so hard his knuckles turned bone white. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. "Evelyn," he breathed the word, choking in his throat. "Good morning, Derek," Evelyn said, her voice perfectly calm, ringing clear and steady across the massive room. "I heard you were giving a presentation on corporate theft. I thought it was only right that the guest of honor attended." "Security!" Derek shrieked, his professional facade instantly shattering into sheer panic. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "Security, get in here. Arrest this woman. She is a fugitive." 2 corporate security guards rushed down the hallway, but before they could even reach the threshold, 2 massive men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows and effortlessly blocked the entrance. They did not raise their hands. They did not have to. The terrifying, lethal stillness of Victor Thorne's personal guard was enough to make the corporate security freeze in their tracks, and then the shadow behind Evelyn's light stepped into the room. Victor Thorne walked through the doorway, his presence suffocating the space like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. He wore a dark charcoal 3-piece suit, his hands resting casually in his pockets, his dark gray eyes sweeping over the terrified board members with absolute freezing indifference. He stopped right behind Evelyn, his broad chest just inches from her back, casting a protective, impenetrable barrier around her. Arthur Sterling. The board chairman stood up so fast, his heavy leather chair tipped over and crashed to the floor. "Mr. Thorne," the elderly man stammered, sweat immediately breaking out across his forehead. What is the meaning of this? Why are you interrupting our private board meeting?" Victor did not look at the chairman. His gaze was locked dead onto Derek, watching the corrupt executive visibly tremble. "I am not interrupting, Arthur," Victor said, his deep, resonant voice vibrating through the glass walls. "I am auditing my new assets." The room went entirely dead. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Victor continued smoothly. Thorne Industries acquired 51% of Vanguard Financial's voting shares. This is no longer your boardroom. It is mine. And I brought the woman who is going to clean up your mess. Victor gently placed his large, warm hand on the small of Evelyn's back, a silent command and an anchor of absolute support. He guided her forward. The board members scrambled out of her way, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Evelyn walked straight to the head of the table, stopping just a few feet from Derek. Derek was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between Evelyn and the ruthless billionaire standing behind her like an angel of death. "You cannot do this," Derek whispered desperately. "She is a thief. She stole the money. The police are waiting in the lobby." "Derek," Evelyn interrupted, her voice entirely devoid of the fear that had paralyzed her last night. She reached into her tailored jacket and pulled out the thick manila folder Victor had given her. She threw it onto the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy, final thud. "I did not run because I was guilty," Evelyn said, her brown eyes locking onto his terrified face, stripping away the last remnants of his arrogance. "I ran because you locked the door, threatened my life, and sent your men to hunt me like an animal in the rain. But you made a mistake, Derek. You got lazy." Evelyn opened the folder and pushed the top document toward the center of the table so the entire board could see. "Those are the IP logs from the Vanguard servers. You routed the stolen $4 million through 3 shell companies in the Caymans to make it look like my workstation authorized the transfer. But you logged into the final verification server using the private Wi-Fi from your country club, the exact same IP address you used to pay your monthly golf dues." The board members leaned in, staring at the undeniable proof. The atmosphere in the room violently turned. The men and women who had just praised Derek now looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "No!" Derek gasped, shaking his head rapidly, stepping backward until his back hit the glass wall. "No! This is fabricated! They are setting me up! Mr. Sterling, you have to believe me. You disgust me, Walsh!" Sterling spat, his face red with fury. "You nearly destroyed this firm to line your own pockets, and you tried to send an innocent woman to federal prison to cover your tracks." The realization of his absolute destruction finally crashed down on Derek. His promotion, his reputation, his freedom, all of it evaporated in the span of 3 minutes. His legs gave out. The arrogant, untouchable executive collapsed to his knees on the carpet right in front of Evelyn. The public regret was instantaneous and pathetic. Tears streamed down his face as he looked up at the woman he had treated like garbage for years. "Evelyn, please." Derek begged, his voice a miserable, broken sob. "Please, I'm sorry. I was under so much pressure. The debts, the expectations, I panicked. We worked together for 2 years. I mentored you. Please do not let them send me to prison. I will give it all back. Just tell him to call off the police. Please, Evelyn, have mercy." Evelyn looked down at the man kneeling at her designer stilettos. She felt no pity. She felt no lingering terror. She just felt free. "You did not mentor me, Derek," Evelyn said coldly, her posture completely unyielding. "You used me. You looked at me and saw someone who was poor, quiet, and alone. You saw someone you thought the world would not miss if you threw her under the bus. But you were wrong." She took one deliberate step back, distancing herself from the pathetic man on the floor. "There is no mercy for men who prey on the weak," she finalized. Victor Thorne stepped forward, his hand returning to Evelyn's waist, pulling her flush against his side. He looked down at Derek with eyes that held the absolute coldness of a grave. "Take out the trash," Victor commanded. The boardroom doors opened wider. 4 uniformed police officers walked in, flanked by 2 federal agents. They hauled Derek Walsh off his knees, cuffing his hands tightly behind his back. Derek continued to sob, begging Evelyn's name as they dragged him out of the room, his voice fading down the hallway until there was nothing but silence left in his wake. The board members stood frozen, terrified to even breathe. Victor swept his gaze over the room, ensuring absolute submission from every person present. Then he looked down at Evelyn. The ruthless, freezing mask he wore for the world cracked, revealing a deep, fiercely protective pride meant only for her. "You did perfectly," he murmured, his thumb brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Evelyn looked up at the man who had pulled her from the dark and handed her a kingdom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, no longer beating with fear, but with a profound, terrifying realization. She had won her life back, but in doing so, she had irrevocably surrendered her heart to the most dangerous man in New York. The adrenaline of the boardroom victory lasted exactly 8 hours. By the time the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, painting the heavy storm clouds in bruised shades of purple and gold, the quiet intimacy of the penthouse had returned. The world outside was reeling from the sudden, violent corporate massacre Victor Thorne had executed. But inside the glass walls of his fortress, there was only peace. Evelyn stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, watching the city lights flicker to life. She had taken off the pristine, white-tailored suit, trading it for one of Victor's oversized dress shirts. It swallowed her slender frame, the soft white cotton smelling intoxicatingly of cedar rain, and him. The heavy oak door clicked open. Victor stepped into the room. He had discarded his suit jacket and tied the top 3 buttons of his shirt undone. He looked physically exhausted, yet utterly magnetic. "You are staring at the city like you expect it to disappear," Victor murmured, his deep voice wrapping around her in the quiet room. "I am looking at it and realizing it does not scare me anymore," Evelyn replied softly, turning to face him. "Because of you." Victor closed the space between them. He raised his hands, his long, warm fingers gently resting on her waist. "You did the work today, Evelyn. You stood in front of the men who tried to break you, and you broke them instead. I just provided the venue. You provided the shield," she corrected, stepping closer until her chest brushed against his. She looked up into his dark gray eyes, the absolute intensity in them making her breath hitch. "Victor, why did you do all of this? The hostile takeover, the necklace, the public declaration. You put a target on your own back to save me. You barely know me." Victor's jaw tightened. He lifted one hand, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her lower lip. "Because I have spent my entire life building an empire made of glass and steel, Evelyn. It is cold. It is empty. And then I saw you. A woman who was drowning in the dark, betrayed by everyone, yet still had more dignity and fire in her eyes than anyone I had ever met. I did not just want to save you. I wanted to keep you." He leaned down his lips, brushing hers in a whisper-soft promise. "I am not a gentle man, but I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to run again." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting out a trembling breath, and closed the final fraction of an inch between them. The kiss was not desperate or hurried. It was deep, consuming, and fiercely possessive. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt completely unconditionally anchored, but the illusion of perfect safety shattered exactly 10 minutes later. A sharp, urgent knock echoed from the heavy mahogany door of the bedroom. Victor pulled back, his eyes instantly darkening from a devoted lover back to a ruthless predator. He stepped in front of Evelyn, shielding her instinctively. "Enter," he commanded. Marcus, Victor's imposing head of security, stepped into the room. His expression was grim, his posture rigid. "Sir, we have a severe problem." Victor's voice dropped to a freezing register. "Report!" "Derek Walsh just died in federal custody," Marcus stated flatly. Evelyn gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Died how he was just arrested this morning." "He was poisoned in his holding cell." Marcus continued, not looking at Evelyn, keeping his eyes fixed respectfully on his boss. "It was not a suicide, and that is not the worst of it. My team finished decoding the rest of the offshore IP logs. Derek was not stealing that $4 million to fund his own lifestyle. He was laundering it to cover a massive deficit for Julian Vance." Victor's entire body went absolutely rigid. The temperature in the room plummeted. Evelyn knew that name from the financial papers. Julian Vance was a legendary, ruthless hedge fund titan with deep violent ties to international mercenaries. He was the shadow behind half the corrupt corporate deals in the country. Vance. Victor breathed, his fists clenching at his sides. Yes, sir, Marcus confirmed. And because you publicly acquired Vanguard Financial today and seized those accounts, Vance's money is gone. He is furious. Our intel confirms he has activated a retrieval team. But they are not coming for the money, Mr. Thorne. They are coming for the woman you publicly claimed this morning. Vance has put a bounty on Miss Hayes to send you a message. Evelyn felt the blood drain entirely from her face. The brief moment of peace she had just found was ripped away, replaced by a suffocating, icy terror. She was not just hunted by a corrupt boss anymore. She was the target of a billionaire syndicate. Victor turned to Marcus. Lock down the tower. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. Ground the private jets. Prep the armored convoy and the helicopter. We move in 20 minutes. Marcus nodded sharply and exited the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Victor immediately turned to his closet, pulling out a heavy tactical jacket. His movements were terrifyingly calm, but the tightly coiled violence in his broad shoulders betrayed his internal panic. Pack a bag, Evelyn. Only the essentials. We are leaving. Leaving? Evelyn asked, her voice shaking as she gripped the edge of the dresser. Going where? I have a fortified estate in the Adirondack Mountains. It is entirely off the grid, guarded by 50 of my best men. You will be safe there until I eradicate Julian Vance. Until you... Evelyn stopped, her eyes widening in horror. You are sending me away. You are going to stay here in the city and fight him alone. Victor stopped, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Julian Vance is a monster, Evelyn. He does not play boardroom games with lawyers. He sends mercenaries to burn people alive in their beds. I will not allow you to be anywhere near this city while he is still breathing. No, Evelyn said, taking a step toward him, her fear transforming into a fierce, desperate anger. Victor, you cannot just lock me in a gilded cage in the mountains while you go to war. They are coming after me. If you stay here, you will be the one in the crosshairs. You are making yourself the bait. That is my job. Victor roared, the sudden, violent explosion of his voice making her flinch. His absolute emotional restraint completely snapped. The mask of the cold, untouchable CEO shattered. He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides, grabbing her upper arms, his grip tight but trembling. Do you not understand? Victor asked, his voice dropping into a ragged, desperate whisper. Today, I stood in front of the world and told them you belong to me. I painted a massive target on your back. If anything happens to you because of my arrogance, if I lose you after just finding you, his voice broke. The ruthless billionaire pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy and uneven. Evelyn, please. You are the only thing in my dark life that matters. I cannot function if I am worried about your safety. Let me protect you. Let me do this. Evelyn felt a hot tear slip down her cheek. She raised her hands, resting them against his broad, tense chest. She could feel his heart hammering violently against her palms. He was terrified. Not of Julian Vance, not of death, but of losing her. She had spent her life running from men who wanted to destroy her. Now she was holding a man who was willing to destroy the entire world to save her. I will go to the estate, Evelyn whispered softly, her fingers gripping the lapels of his shirt, anchoring him. On one condition. Victor pulled back slightly, his dark eyes desperately searching her face. Name it. You do not fight this war recklessly, she said, her voice hardening with the same fierce determination she had found in the boardroom. You promise me that you will finish Julian Vance, and then you will come back to me. If you die to protect me, Victor, I will never forgive you. Victor's expression hardened into a beautiful, lethal promise. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a burning brand of absolute devotion. Julian Vance made a fatal miscalculation today, Victor whispered against her skin, his voice echoing with deadly absolute certainty. He threatened the woman I'm going to marry. He just does not know he is already a dead man. The descent into the private underground parking garage of the Thorne Tower felt like sinking into a concrete tomb. The air was cold-heavy with the scent of exhaust and damp concrete. 5 armored black SUVs idled in a perfect defensive formation, their engines purring with suppressed lethal power. Marcus and a dozen heavily armed security personnel formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter around the convoy. Evelyn walked slightly behind Victor, her hand gripped firmly in his. Her small overnight bag felt like a lead weight against her shoulder. The reality of the situation was a suffocating pressure in her chest. She was fleeing. Julian Vance, a man who dealt in blood and corporate warfare, had put a bounty on her head, and Victor was mobilizing a small army just to get her out of the city. "We take the southern exit," Victor commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. 2 decoy vehicles will break north. The helicopter is waiting at the secondary extraction point. We move fast, and we do not stop. Victor opened the heavy, bulletproof door of the center SUV. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second as he guided her toward the leather interior. That was when the concrete ceiling above the southern exit violently exploded. The deafening shockwave knocked the breath from Evelyn's lungs. A massive cloud of pulverized concrete and smoke billowed into the garage, instantly blinding the security cameras and plunging the far end of the facility into darkness. The screech of tires echoed through the smoke as 3 heavily modified tactical vehicles smashed through the ruined security gates, blocking their only escape route. "Ambush her," Marcus roared over the comms, his weapon instantly raised. "Defensive positions protect the principal." Gunfire erupted, tearing through the quiet garage like a chaotic thunderstorm. Victor did not hesitate. His reaction was pure, terrifying instinct. His powerful arm hooked around Evelyn's waist, lifting her entirely off her feet as he threw them both behind the massive engine block of the armored SUV. The sound of high-caliber bullets raining against the reinforced steel of the vehicles was deafening. Sparks flew as metal sheared metal. Evelyn hit the cold concrete floor, her breath leaving her in a harsh gasp. Before she could even register the pain, Victor was covering her completely. His heavy tactical jacket shielded her, his broad shoulders forming a physical barricade between her and the flying shrapnel. "Stay down!" Victor roared over the deafening gunfire, his hands gripping her face, his dark eyes scanning her rapidly for injuries. "Evelyn, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I am okay," she gasped, her hands clinging to the lapels of his jacket, her heart hammering frantically against her ribs. "Victor, they blocked the exit. We are trapped." Victor's jaw clenched into a hard, unforgiving line. He reached to his hip and drew a heavy, matte black handgun. The ruthless CEO was gone. In his place was a man forged in violence, a predator backed into a corner protecting his mate. "Nobody traps me in my own building," Victor said, his voice a low, lethal growl. He rolled off her, rising to a crouch behind the SUV's reinforced tire. He moved with a terrifying, calculated grace, returning fire with lethal precision. Evelyn pressed her back against the cold tire, her hands covering her ears, her entire body shaking. The garage smelled of cordite, burning rubber and blood. She could hear Marcus shouting tactical commands, the groans of injured guards, and the relentless advancement of Vance's mercenaries. She was supposed to cower. She was supposed to close her eyes and wait for the men to finish their brutal work. But as Evelyn crouched in the dark, she realized something profound. Victor Thorne was fighting an impossible battle because he was splitting his focus. Every 3 seconds, his eyes darted back to her, ensuring she was safe. He was fighting with one hand tied behind his back, paralyzed by his fear of losing her. Evelyn refused to be his weakness. She forced her eyes open. She looked through the gap under the SUV. The smoke was thick, but the emergency floor lights cast long, distorted shadows. She saw Victor's men engaging the main assault at the front of the convoy, but then she saw a shadow moving differently. A lone mercenary dressed entirely in black was flanking them from the blind side, slipping behind the concrete pillars, moving silently toward Victor's exposed right flank. Victor was reloading, his attention entirely focused on the suppressing fire ahead. He did not see the man raising an automatic weapon just 20 yards away. Panic seized Evelyn's throat, but she swallowed it down. She looked wildly around her immediate surroundings. 2 feet away from her, bolted to the massive concrete pillar, was a red emergency security override panel. She knew exactly what it was. During her late nights at Vanguard, she had studied the architectural blueprints of the Thorne Tower for a risk assessment project. That panel controlled the garage's emergency lockdown protocol, a system designed to deploy titanium blast doors and blinding halon-integrated floodlights in the event of a terrorist breach. The mercenary stepped out from behind the pillar, taking aim at Victor's back. Evelyn did not scream. A scream would distract Victor and cost him a fatal second. Instead, she threw herself forward, sliding across the rough glass-covered concrete, completely leaving the safety of the SUV. "Oh! Evelyn!" Victor roared, his voice tearing in absolute terror as he saw her break cover. She slammed her hand into the glass casing of the security panel, shattering it with her bare palm. Blood smeared against the plastic as she desperately punched the red override sequence. The garage responded instantly. A deafening siren wailed. Searing, blindingly bright halogen security lights detonated from the ceiling, completely flooding the dark garage with an agonizing white glare. The sudden intense light blinded the advancing mercenaries, who cried out, dropping their weapons to shield their eyes. The mercenary aiming at Victor stumbled backward, completely blinded by the flash. Victor did not miss the opportunity. Using the distraction Evelyn had provided, he pivoted smoothly, raising his weapon and firing 2 rapid silencing shots. The mercenary collapsed to the concrete. Massive titanium blast doors instantly slammed down over all the exits, sealing the surviving attackers inside a kill zone with Victor's heavily armed security team. The tide of the battle turned in a matter of seconds. Without their tactical advantage and blinded by the lights, Vance's men were swiftly and brutally neutralized by Marcus and his squad. The gunfire slowly died down, replaced by the heavy, ringing silence and the wail of the security alarms. Victor dropped his weapon and crossed the distance to Evelyn in a fraction of a second. He dropped to his knees, pulling her violently into his chest. His hands were shaking as they roamed over her hair, her shoulders checking for bullet wounds. When he saw the blood dripping from her palm, where she had smashed the glass, he let out a ragged, agonizing breath. "I told you to stay down," Victor whispered fiercely, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his broad chest heaving. "My God, Evelyn, you stepped out into open fire. I almost watched you die." Evelyn wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, burying her face against his tactical jacket. She was trembling, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "He was behind you, Victor. He had a clear shot. I could not just sit there and let him take you from me. I told you if you die protecting me, I will never forgive you." Victor pulled back his hands, gripping her face. The look in his dark gray eyes was a mixture of profound fury, awe, and an all-consuming love that bordered on worship. He was looking at a woman who had spent her life being invisible, who had just walked through a storm of bullets to save the most dangerous man in the city. "You are reckless." He breathed, his thumb smearing the dust and tears on her cheek. "I am learning from you," she replied, a faint, exhausted smile touching her lips. Victor let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. He leaned forward and kissed her, a desperate, bruising collision of lips and teeth that tasted of gunpowder and absolute survival. It was a kiss that sealed their fates together. She was no longer just the woman he was protecting. She was his equal. She was his anchor. When he finally pulled away, the panic in his eyes had been completely replaced by a cold, calculating ruthlessness. The billionaire predator had returned, but this time he was not fighting alone. Victor stood up, pulling Evelyn to her feet and keeping her tucked safely against his side. Marcus approached his face, streaked with soot, his weapon lowered. "The perimeter is secure, sir. The attackers are neutralized, but the garage is sealed. We cannot get to the mountain estate tonight." Victor looked at the wreckage of the armored vehicles, then down at Evelyn, who was standing tall beside him, her bleeding hand wrapped tightly in his. "Cancel the convoy," Victor commanded, his voice echoing in the ruined garage with deadly authority. "We are not running to the mountains. Julian Vance wanted to send me a message. Now I am going to send him a response. Marcus, assemble the entire strike team. We are ending this tonight." The silence in the penthouse was no longer a heavy velvet cage. It was a sanctuary. 3 days had passed since the violent ambush in the underground garage. 3 days since Victor Thorne had walked out into the night to dismantle an international syndicate. Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the morning sun casting a warm, golden glow over her skin. She held a cup of black coffee in her left hand. Her right hand was neatly wrapped in white gauze, a quiet reminder of the glass she had shattered and the life she had saved. She watched the city below, feeling a profound sense of peace. The heavy oak door of the penthouse clicked open. Evelyn turned. Victor stood in the entryway. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and conquered it. His tactical jacket was gone, replaced by a dark, unbuttoned dress shirt. Shadows of exhaustion lined his sharp jaw, and his knuckles were bruised, but his dark gray eyes were completely clear. The ruthless, terrifying storm that had surrounded him for the past 72 hours had finally broken. He dropped his keys onto the console table and looked across the massive living room. When his eyes locked onto her, the tension drained from his broad shoulders. Evelyn set her coffee cup down and walked toward him. She did not rush. There was no more need for panic. She stopped right in front of him, reaching up to gently cup his stubbled cheek with her uninjured hand. "It is done," Victor murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief second. "Julian Vance is gone. His assets have been seized by international authorities. His mercenaries are locked away, and his empire is completely dismantled. He will spend the rest of his miserable life in a maximum security cell, entirely forgotten." Evelyn let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 3 days. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his solid chest. Victor's strong arms immediately completely engulfed her, pulling her so close she could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. "You came back to me," she whispered the words, carrying the weight of a vow fulfilled. "I will always come back to you, Evelyn," Victor promised fiercely, pressing a deep kiss to the crown of her head. "There is no force on this earth that could keep me away from you." They stood there in the quiet sunlight, 2 survivors who had forged an unbreakable bond in the fires of betrayal and violence. But Victor Thorne was not a man who stopped at survival. He built empires, and he was about to give her the keys to one. Victor pulled back slightly, his hands resting on her hips. A faint, devastatingly handsome smile touched his lips. "I have a meeting in 2 hours at the Vanguard Financial Headquarters. The board of directors is completely paralyzed without Derek Walsh. They need a new executive to restructure the firm and clean up the corruption." Evelyn looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "Who are you going to appoint?" Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a pristine black leather portfolio. He handed it to her. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside was a formal executive contract stamped with the golden seal of Thorne Industries. The title at the top made her breath catch in her throat. Evelyn Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Vanguard Financial Division. "Victor," she breathed, staring at the document in absolute shock. This is the entire firm. You want me to run Vanguard? I want you to own it," Victor corrected smoothly, his dark eyes shining with absolute pride. "You know that company better than the men who built it. You know where the rot is, and you know how to cut it out. They tried to throw you away, Evelyn. Now they are going to work for you. You will answer to no one, except me occasionally over dinner." Evelyn looked at the contract, then up at the man who had seen her brilliance when the rest of the world only saw a target. He was not just giving her a job. He was giving her the ultimate emotional justice. He was returning the dignity Derek had tried to steal multiplied by 1 billion. "I do not know what to say," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Say you will stand beside me," Victor murmured, leaning down until his lips were hovering just an inch from hers. "Say you will be my partner. In business, in life, in everything." Evelyn smiled a brilliant, fearless expression that completely illuminated her face. "I am already standing beside you, Victor, and I am never leaving." 1 month later, the relentless rain of New York City was replaced by a crisp, clear autumn evening. The Thorne Industries Tower was ablaze with light, hosting the most exclusive charity gala of the year. The grand lobby with its imported Italian marble and golden chandeliers was packed with the elite of the city. A sleek black Bentley pulled up to the glass entrance. The paparazzi flashes erupted like a storm of white light. The heavy glass doors swung open. The murmuring crowd naturally parted like the Red Sea, falling into a respectful, awestruck silence. Evelyn stepped onto the marble floor. The transformation was absolute and staggering. She wore a custom midnight blue silk gown that cascaded around her like liquid sapphire. At her throat rested the flawless diamond necklace Victor had given her, a glittering declaration of her untouchable status. Her posture was regal, her gaze calm and incredibly powerful. She was no longer the terrified, bleeding woman who had crashed through these doors begging for her life. She was the CEO of Vanguard Financial. She was the future Mrs. Victor Thorne. She was a queen stepping into her court. Victor walked 1/2 step behind her, looking like a dark, lethal king in his tailored tuxedo. His hand rested firmly and possessively on the small of her back. He did not look at the billionaires or the politicians clamoring for his attention. His eyes were focused entirely on the woman walking beside him. As they reached the center of the lobby, Evelyn paused. She looked down at the exact spot on the marble floor where Derek Walsh had grabbed her wrist, where she had thought her life was ending in humiliation and despair. There was no blood left. There was no fear. She looked up, her brown eyes meeting Victor's dark gray gaze. He stopped, completely ignoring the hundreds of people watching them. He lifted her hand, the hand that had smashed the glass to save his life, and gently kissed her knuckles. "Are you ready?" Victor asked softly. His voice meant only for her. Evelyn looked at the empire surrounding them, and the fierce, devoted man who had built it. She had walked through the dark, and she had emerged untouchable. "I have never been more ready," Evelyn smiled. They walked forward together, stepping into the brilliant light, leaving the shadows behind them forever. If you made it to the end of Evelyn and Victor's journey, thank you for listening. Tell me which moment of her pain moved you the most. Do you believe more in late regrets or in absolute emotional justice? And would you ever forgive a man who realized the truth too late? Or do you prefer a protector who sees your worth from the very beginning? Leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next story.